The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly over the dusty main street of Redemption Creek as townspeople gathered in a tight circle. Their faces were hard as the desert stone, eyes filled with righteous fury and cruel satisfaction. In the center of that human wall stood Sarah Mitchell, her dark hair matted with sweat and dirt, clutching her 3-month-old daughter against her chest. "You brought shame upon this town." Sheriff Coleman's voice boomed across the square, his weathered face twisted with disgust. "A child born out of wedlock is God's punishment for your sins, and now the whole community must bear witness to your judgment." Sarah's knees trembled as 2 men forced her hands behind her back, prying little Mary from her desperate grasp. Baby's cries pierced the air like broken glass. "Please," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmuring crowd. "She's innocent. Whatever you do to me, please don't hurt my child." Pastor Williams stepped forward, his black coat flapping in the desert wind. "The Bible is clear about adultery and fornication. The wages of sin is death, but we are merciful. 20 lashes and perhaps the Lord will forgive your transgression." The crowd pressed closer, their faces eager for the spectacle. Sarah recognized many of them: Mrs. Henderson from the general store, who had always smiled at her before; Tom Bradley, who had tried to court her just months ago; even some of the women she had sewn dresses for when times were desperate. "Strip her back," the sheriff commanded. Rough hands tore at Sarah's worn cotton dress, exposing her pale shoulders to the scorching sun. The leather whip cracked like thunder in Coleman's grip, and Sarah closed her eyes, thinking of her daughter's face, of the father who would never claim them, of the dreams that had died the moment her condition became visible to the world. The first lash came without warning, a line of fire across her shoulder blades. Sarah bit her lip until she tasted blood, refusing to give them the satisfaction of her screams. The second strike crossed the first, and her vision blurred with tears she wouldn't let fall. "Confess your sins," Pastor Williams shouted. "Repent before God and this community." By the 10th lash, Sarah's back was a canvas of welts and blood. Her legs gave out, but the men holding her kept her upright for the punishment to continue. The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the spectacle like vultures to carrion. Children peered between their parents' legs, wide-eyed and frightened. Then, through the haze of pain, Sarah heard something that made the crowd stir uneasily: the steady rhythm of horse hooves on packed earth. A lone rider approached from the direction of the mountains, his silhouette dark against the brilliant sky. The man dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and gray eyes that seemed to take in everything without revealing anything in return. His name was James Caldwell, and he owned the largest ranch in the territory, but he might as well have been a ghost for how rarely he came to town. "What's the meaning of this?" His voice was quiet, but it carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Sheriff Coleman straightened, suddenly uncertain. "Mr. Caldwell, this woman has committed adultery. We're carrying out the judgment of the town council." James walked through the crowd, which parted before him like wheat before a scythe. He knelt beside Sarah, who had collapsed to her knees, her back a maze of bloody stripes. Gently, he touched her chin, lifting her face to meet his eyes. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice hoarse from holding back screams. "Sarah Mitchell." He nodded once, then stood and faced the crowd. "This woman is under my protection now. The punishment ends here." Pastor Williams sputtered in outrage. "You can't interfere with God's justice. She must pay for her sins." James turned those gray eyes on the preacher, and something in his gaze made the man step back. "If she's such a sinner, then she needs a husband to guide her path. I'll marry her. Today. Right now." The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Sheriff Coleman shook his head vigorously. "You can't be serious, Caldwell. She's a fallen woman. She has a bastard child." "Every child deserves a father," James replied, his voice steady as bedrock. "And every woman deserves a chance at redemption. Will you perform the ceremony, Pastor, or do I need to ride to the next county?" Sarah stared up at this stranger who had appeared like an answer to prayers she hadn't dared to voice. His face was hard-carved by wind and sun, but his eyes held a gentleness that made her heart flutter with something she thought had died forever. Hope. Pastor Williams looked around at the crowd, seeing the mixture of shock and disapproval on their faces. This is highly irregular. The woman is a sinner. She needs to complete her penance. Her penance can be a lifetime of honest work and faithful marriage, James said, extending his hand to Sarah. What do you say, Miss Mitchell? Will you have me? Sarah's mind reeled. This man was offering her everything she had lost: respectability, protection, a future for her daughter. But what did he want in return? Why would he saddle himself with a woman marked by shame and a child that wasn't his? She looked into his eyes, searching for mockery or cruelty, but found only patient kindness. Around them, the crowd waited, hungry for her answer. Her daughter's cries had quieted to exhausted whimpers in Mrs. Henderson's reluctant arms. "Yes," Sarah whispered, then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." James helped her to her feet, his strong hands careful of her injured back. He shrugged out of his leather jacket and draped it over her shoulders, covering the evidence of her punishment. "Then let's get this done," he said, turning to Pastor Williams. "Marry us." The ceremony was brief and awkward, conducted in the middle of the dusty street with Sarah's blood still drying on her back and the crowd pressing close like witnesses to an execution. When James slipped a simple gold band on her finger, where had he gotten it? Sarah felt as if she were in a dream. "You may kiss the bride," Pastor Williams said reluctantly. James leaned down and pressed his lips gently to Sarah's forehead, a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. Then he scooped little Mary from Mrs. Henderson's arms, cradling the baby with surprising ease. "Time to go home," he murmured to Sarah, and helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. As they rode away from Redemption Creek, Sarah felt the hostile stares of the townspeople burning into her back. She had been saved from the immediate punishment, but she knew this was far from over. In a town like this, forgiveness came hard, and some wounds never healed. But for now, wrapped in her mysterious husband's jacket, with her daughter safe in his arms, Sarah allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found her redemption after all. The Caldwell Ranch sprawled across the valley like a kingdom unto itself, bounded by red rock mesas and flowing streams that caught the golden light of evening. Sarah had never seen anything so beautiful or so isolated. The main house was built of native stone and weathered timber, with a wraparound porch that offered views of endless sky. James helped her down from the horse, his hands steady and respectful. "This is Elena," he said, introducing a middle-aged Mexican woman who had appeared on the porch. "She keeps the house running and has been wanting someone to fuss over for years." Elena's dark eyes took in Sarah's condition with a mixture of sympathy and practical concern. "Ay, pobrecita," she murmured, gently taking baby Mary. "Come, we get you cleaned up and fed. Then we see about those wounds." The house was larger than any Sarah had ever been inside, with wide rooms filled with handmade furniture and Navajo rugs. Elena led her to a bedroom with windows facing west toward the mountains. A copper bathtub sat in one corner, already being filled with steaming water by a young man Elena introduced as her son, Miguel. "This is your room now," Elena said firmly. "You rest here as long as you need. The baby, she can sleep in the cradle."
"Senor James, he made it himself when he heard you were coming." Sarah turned to James in surprise. "When you heard I was coming? But you didn't know about me until today." Something flickered across James's face too quickly for her to read.
"I've been planning to marry for some time. A ranch this size needs a woman's touch." His tone was matter of fact, but Sarah sensed layers beneath his words she didn't understand. After James left them alone, Elena helped Sarah into the warm bath, her weathered hands gentle as she cleaned the wounds on Sarah's back. "That man," Elena said quietly. "He has a good heart, but he carries much pain. You both have been hurt, I think. Perhaps you can heal each other." As Elena tended her injuries with salve that smelled of desert herbs, Sarah found herself opening up about her past. the traveling salesman who had swept her off her feet with pretty words and promises, then vanished when she told him about the baby. The months of hiding her condition, working as a seamstress until her belly grew too large. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of hammering. From her window, she could see James working shirtless in the corral, his muscled back gleaming with sweat as he repaired fence posts. Scars crisscrossed his torso. Some looked like knife wounds, others like burns. Whatever his past held, it had marked him as surely as the whip had marked her. He was a soldier, Elena explained when Sarah asked. Fought in the Apache Wars. Lost his whole unit in an ambush up in the Chiricahuas. Came back different, broken inside. Never talks about it, but the nightmares, they still come. Over the following days, Sarah settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She helped Elena with cooking and cleaning, grateful for work that felt meaningful. James was kind but distant, often disappearing for hours to work with the cattle or ride the boundary lines. He spoke little during meals, but Sarah caught him watching her sometimes, his gray eyes thoughtful and unreadable. Little Mary thrived in the mountain air, her cheeks growing rosy and plump. James seemed genuinely fond of the baby, often carrying her around the ranch while he worked, talking to her in the same quiet tones he used with his horses. It was on the fourth day that the first trouble came. Sarah was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she spotted riders approaching from the direction of town. Her blood turned cold as she recognized Sheriff Coleman's distinctive bay horse. "Elena," she called, running for the house. "Riders coming." James appeared from the barn, his hand resting casually on the grip of his colt. "Stay inside," he told Sarah. "Keep Mary quiet." From the kitchen window, Sarah watched as 5 men reined up in front of the house. Along with Sheriff Coleman, she recognized Tom Bradley and 2 other men from town, plus a stranger wearing a deputy's badge. "Caldwell," the sheriff called. "We need to talk." James stepped onto the porch, his stance relaxed but ready. "What brings you out here, Coleman? That woman you married, there's been talk. Some folks think she bewitched you somehow, made you act against your better judgment." "My judgment is just fine, thanks." Tom Bradley spurred his horse forward, his face flushed with anger and something darker. "She's a whore, James. A fallen woman who's made fools of us all. Send her back to town to face proper justice." James's voice dropped to a deadly quiet. "You'll watch your tongue when speaking about my wife, Bradley." "Wife?" The deputy laughed harshly. "What kind of marriage is that? Performed under duress, with a woman who is being punished for her sins? It ain't legal, and it sure ain't Christian." Sarah's heart pounded as she realized what they were trying to do. Invalidate the marriage, take away her protection, drag her back for more punishment. Her hands shook as she clutched Mary closer. "The marriage is legal and binding," James said. "Pastor Williams performed it in front of witnesses. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the territorial court." Sheriff Coleman shifted in his saddle. "There's also been reports of strange doings out here. Lights in the hills at night. People seen who shouldn't be there. Some folks think your wife brought a curse with her. The only curse around here is ignorance and superstition." James took a step forward. "Now I suggest you gentlemen head back to town before you wear out your welcome." But Tom Bradley wasn't done. "We know about your nightmares, James, about how you wake up screaming. Maybe that woman really has put some kind of hex on you. Why else would a man like you saddle himself with damaged goods?" The change in James was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment he was standing calmly on the porch, the next, he had Bradley, by the throat, dragging him from his horse. The 2 men went down in the dust, James's fists connecting with brutal efficiency. "James, no!" Sarah burst from the house, Mary in her arms. "Stop!" Her voice seemed to reach him through his rage. He stood slowly, leaving Bradley groaning in the dirt. Blood flowed from the man's nose and his lip was split. "Next man who insults my wife gets worse than that," James said, his voice deadly calm. "Now get off my land, all of you." As the riders retreated, Sarah saw the looks they exchanged, the hard promise of future trouble. This wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. That night, James sat on the porch cleaning his rifle, his movements methodical and practiced. Sarah brought him coffee and sat beside him, Mary sleeping peacefully in her arms. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "No. Why did you really marry me, James? And don't tell me it was just because you needed a wife." He was silent for so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I know what it's like to be judged for things beyond your control. To have people look at you and see only your worst moment." He glanced at her, then back at the darkening mountains. "And because maybe we both deserve a second chance." In the distance, a coyote howled, its voice echoing across the vast emptiness. Sarah shivered, sensing that their peaceful refuge was about to be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. The attacks began subtly, like rattlesnakes testing their prey before striking. First, it was the poisoned water trough that killed 3 head of cattle, then the cut fence lines that let the horses scatter across the valley. Each incident could have been dismissed as bad luck or accident, but James knew better. "They're trying to bleed us slowly," he told Sarah as they surveyed the damaged corral gate. "Make it too expensive to keep the ranch running." Sarah watched him work, admiring the quiet competence with which he repaired the sabotage. Over the past 2 weeks, she had begun to see beneath his reserved exterior to the man underneath, scarred but not broken, lonely but not bitter. She found herself caring for him in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the way he sang softly to Mary while feeding her, or how he always asked Elena about her arthritis with genuine concern. "Maybe I should go back to town," Sarah said reluctantly. "Face whatever punishment they think I deserve. This isn't fair to you." James straightened, his gray eyes fierce. "You're my wife now. That means we face troubles together. Don't even think about running." The word wife still felt strange on her tongue, but less strange each day. Their marriage had begun as a rescue, but something deeper was growing between them. Trust, understanding, and the fragile beginning of love. That evening, Elena pulled Sarah aside in the kitchen. "There is something you should know," she said, glancing toward the door to make sure James wasn't nearby. "About why he really married you." Sarah's hand stilled on the bread dough she was kneading. "What do you mean?" 3 years ago, there was another woman, Maria Delgado from the Pueblo. She was with child, and the father, he would not claim her. The townspeople, they were going to drive her out into the desert to die. Sarah's heart clenched. "What happened?" "Senor James, he wanted to help her, to marry her like he did you. But he was away, selling cattle in Tucson. By the time he returned..." Elena crossed herself. "They found her body in the arroyo, the baby too." The dough blurred as tears filled Sarah's eyes. "He's been carrying that guilt all this time. See, he blamed himself, thought if he had been there, he could have saved them. When he saw you in that square, I think he saw a chance to make things right, to save the woman he could not save before. That night." Sarah lay awake thinking about James's words on their wedding day, about every woman deserving a chance at redemption. She had thought he was speaking about her, but now she understood he was also talking about himself. The next morning brought visitors of a different sort. Sarah was in the garden picking vegetables when she heard the thunder of hoofbeats approaching fast. She ran to the house calling for James, but he was already striding from the barn, rifle in hand. 5 riders crested the hill, but these weren't townspeople. They were hard men with dead eyes and tied-down guns, the kind who sold their services to whoever paid best. Leading them was a man Sarah recognized with a shock of fear that nearly brought her to her knees. "Hello, Sarah," called Marcus Kane, her daughter's biological father. "Miss me?" Marcus sat his horse like he owned the world, his handsome face wearing the same charming smile that had once fooled her into thinking he was a good man. His expensive clothes and silver-trimmed saddle spoke of newfound wealth, but his eyes held the same calculating coldness that had emerged after she told him about the pregnancy. "You have no business here," James said, his voice deadly quiet. "Right on." Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, but I do have business here. You see, I've recently come into some money, a business venture in California that paid off handsomely. and I've decided I want my daughter back." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. "You gave up any claim to her when you abandoned us." "Did I? Because I don't recall signing any papers. And legally speaking, that child belongs to me, not to whatever desperate fool you've convinced to marry you." James took a step forward, and Sarah could see the soldier in him, cold and dangerous. "The child's name is Mary Caldwell now. She's my daughter in the eyes of the law and God." "Your marriage is a sham," one of Marcus's men said, his hand resting on his gun butt. "Everyone knows you only married her to save her from a well-deserved whipping. Besides," Marcus added with mock reasonableness, "I can provide for her now. Give her opportunities, education, a chance at respectability. What can she have here except the life of a rancher's wife? Assuming, of course, that this little fantasy, marriage, lasts." Sarah felt the world spinning around her. She had known this peace was too good to last, but she hadn't expected the threat to come from this direction. Marcus had never wanted Mary before. Why now? "She's not going anywhere," James said flatly. Marcus's smile turned predatory. "We'll see about that. I've filed papers with the territorial court claiming custody of my daughter, and I've heard some interesting stories about your wife's behavior. The strange happenings around here makes a man wonder what kind of influence she'd be on an innocent child." "Get off my land," James said, his hand moving to his Colt. "Now." "Oh, we're going, but we'll be back with the law and proper papers. Enjoy your last few days playing family." Marcus reined his horse around. "Sarah, sweetheart, you should have stayed with me when I asked. Would have saved us all this trouble." After they rode away, Sarah sank onto the porch steps, her legs too weak to hold her. Mary gurgled happily in Elena's arms, unaware that her world was about to be torn apart. "He's lying," Sarah said desperately. "He never asked me to stay with him. When I told him about the baby, he said I was a fool if I thought he'd saddle himself with a bastard child." James sat beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "I believe you, but the question is, what's changed? Why does he want Mary now?" Sarah thought back to the expensive clothes, the hired guns, Marcus's mention of a business venture. He said he came into money. Maybe he needs an heir for some reason, or thinks having a child will make him look respectable to potential business partners. Or maybe someone's paying him to take her, Elena said quietly. Both Sarah and James looked at her in surprise. "What? You think those men from town, they would not pay to see you punished more, to take away the thing you love most?" The thought was too horrible to contemplate, but Sarah knew Elena might be right. The hatred she had seen in Tom Bradley's eyes, the sheriff's talk of curses and strange happenings. They wanted her to suffer, and taking Mary would be the cruelest blow imaginable. That evening, James called a meeting in the main room. Elena, Miguel, and the 3 ranch hands gathered around the table as James spread out a map of the territory. "If Kane comes back with legal papers, we'll need to be ready," he said. "They'll try to take Mary by force if they have to. We need to know every trail, every hiding place in these mountains." "You're talking about running," Sarah said. "Making ourselves outlaws." James met her eyes steadily. "I'm talking about protecting my family. The law isn't always just, Sarah. Sometimes you have to make your own justice." Old Pete, the senior ranch hand, spat tobacco juice into a tin can. "Been expecting this kind of trouble ever since you married her, boss. No offense, ma'am, but that town's got a long memory for grudges." "None taken," Sarah replied. She was beginning to understand that her past would follow her everywhere, poisoning every chance at happiness. "Maybe I should just go, take Mary and disappear. You've all done enough for us." "No." James's voice brooked no argument. "We stand together. That's what family does." Miguel leaned forward, his young face earnest. "My cousins in Sonora, they would hide you if needed. The federales, they do not ask many questions about gringos who mind their own business." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," James said. "But it's good to know we have options." As the meeting broke up, Sarah walked out onto the porch, needing air and space to think. The desert night was vast and star-filled, beautiful and terrible in its emptiness. Somewhere out there, Marcus Kane was planning her destruction, and she felt as helpless as she had in that dusty town square. James found her there, standing at the porch rail with Mary in her arms. He didn't speak, just stood beside her, sharing the weight of her fear. "I love her so much it physically hurts," Sarah whispered. "The thought of losing her, of her growing up thinking I abandoned her." "That won't happen." James's voice was granite hard with certainty. "I made you a promise when I married you, to protect what's mine. Mary is mine now just as much as you are." Sarah looked at him, this man who had appeared like a guardian angel in her darkest hour. "Why do you care so much? Really? Elena told me about Maria Delgado, about how you blame yourself for not saving her." James was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "When I came back from the Apache Wars, I was broken inside. Couldn't sleep, couldn't be around people, couldn't see any point in living. Elena and Miguel, they nursed me back to something resembling human. But I was still alone, still carrying all that death and guilt." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "When I saw you in that square, saw the courage it took to stand there and take that punishment without begging, I knew you were stronger than I'd ever been. And when I held Mary for the first time, felt her little hand grip my finger, he swallowed hard. I realized I'd been given a chance to protect something precious instead of destroying it, to build something instead of tearing it down." Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. "And now I've brought danger to your door. You've brought life to my door, light to a house that's been dark too long." He turned to face her fully. "Sarah, I need you to know something. This marriage started as a way to protect you, but it's become something real for me. I love you, both of you, and I'll die before I let anyone hurt my family." The words hung in the desert air like a sacred promise. Sarah reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses and scars that told the story of his life. "I love you too," she whispered. "God help me. I never thought I could trust a man again, but you've shown me what real love looks like." They stood together in the starlight, holding each other and their daughter, drawing strength from their connection, but even as they embraced, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their time was running out, that the storm gathering on the horizon would test their love in ways they couldn't yet imagine. In the distance, an owl called mournfully, and Sarah shivered, despite the warm night air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to everything they were building together. But tonight they had each other, and for now that would have to be enough. Dawn came gray and ominous, with storm clouds building over the mountains and the wind carrying the scent of rain and trouble. Sarah woke to find James already gone from their bed. They had been sharing a room for the past week, their marriage growing more real with each passing day. She found him on the porch, fully dressed and armed, watching a dust cloud approach from the direction of town. Even at this distance, she could count at least a dozen riders. "Is it them?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Kane's got papers," James said grimly. "I can see the sheriff's badge glinting in the light. They're coming in force this time." Elena appeared with Mary in her arms, the baby fussing. As if she sensed the tension in the air. "The root cellar," she said urgently. "There is a tunnel that leads to the old mine shaft. Miguel, he can take you and the Niña through the mountains to the pueblo." Sarah took her daughter, her heart breaking at the thought of running again. "What about James? What about all of you?" "We'll hold them as long as we can," James said. "Give you time to get away. Pete and the boys, they know these hills better than any posse from town." "No." Sarah's voice was steady despite her fear. "I won't run anymore. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me." James turned to her, his gray eyes fierce with emotion. "Sarah, be reasonable. If they take Mary, you may never see her again. Kane has money now, lawyers. He can disappear with her before we can fight it in court. And if I run, what kind of life is that for her? Always looking over our shoulders, never having a real home?" Sarah shook her head firmly. "This is our home. This is our family. We make our stand here." The riders were close enough now to make out individual faces. Along with Sheriff Coleman and Marcus Kane, Sarah recognized Tom Bradley, Pastor Williams, and several other men from town. Kane's hired guns rode in formation, their hands resting on their weapons. "At least let me take Mary to safety," Elena pleaded. "If things go bad." Sarah looked down at her daughter's innocent face, then at James. She saw her own resolve reflected in his eyes. They had found something worth fighting for, and they wouldn't give it up without a battle. "Take her to the house," Sarah said to Elena. "Keep her away from the windows, but don't run, not unless I tell you to." The riders reined up in front of the house, their horses snorting and pawing the ground. Marcus Kane sat his mount with arrogant confidence, a legal document held prominently in his hand. "James Caldwell," Sheriff Coleman called out, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. "I have here a court order granting custody of the minor child Mary Mitchell to her natural father, Marcus Kane. You will surrender the child immediately." James stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun butt. "The child's name is Mary Caldwell. She's my adopted daughter and she stays here." Kane laughed coldly. "Your marriage is a sham, Caldwell. Everyone knows you only wed that whore to save her from proper punishment. That doesn't give you any legal—" "Watch your mouth," James warned, his voice deadly quiet. Pastor Williams urged his horse forward. "Mr. Caldwell, surely you can see that this child needs to be raised in a proper Christian home, not by a woman of loose morals who has clearly bewitched you with her feminine wiles." Sarah felt rage building in her chest. "Bewitched him? Is that what you tell yourselves? That any man who shows me kindness must be under some kind of spell?" "We've heard about the strange happenings out here," Tom Bradley said, his face still, bearing faint bruises from his fight with James. "Lights in the hills, unnatural sounds. You've brought a curse down on this whole valley." "The only curse here is ignorance and hatred," James replied. "Now I suggest you all turn around and head back to town before this gets ugly." Kane pulled out a pocket watch, checking the time with theatrical precision. "You have exactly 5 minutes to produce my daughter, or my associates will retrieve her by force. The law is on my side, Caldwell. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Sarah stepped up beside James, her chin raised defiantly. "You want Mary? You'll have to go through me first." "Oh, I intend to," Kane said softly. "In fact, I'm looking forward to it. You cost me a considerable sum when you refused my generous offer 3 years ago. It's time to collect on that debt." The pieces suddenly fell into place for Sarah. "You never offered to take me with you. You threw money at me to get rid of the pregnancy, and when I refused, you disappeared." Kane shrugged. "Details. The point is, you made your choice and now you have to live with the consequences." Sheriff Coleman shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Look, this doesn't have to end in bloodshed. Just hand over the child and we can all go home peacefully." "No." The voice came from an unexpected source. Elena, who had appeared on the porch with Mary in her arms and a shotgun in her hands. "This Nina, she belongs here. Anyone who tries to take her will answer to me." Miguel emerged from the barn, rifle ready. Old Pete and the other ranch hands took positions around the yard, their weapons trained on the posse. What had started as a simple custody dispute was rapidly escalating into a range war. "You're all making a big mistake," Coleman warned. "I've got territorial marshals riding from Tucson. They'll be here by nightfall. Resist lawful authority and you'll all hang." "Then we'd better settle this before they arrive," James said quietly. "Kane, you want to claim Mary as your daughter? Then prove it. Where were you when Sarah was carrying her? Where were you when she was born, when she was sick with fever last month, when she took her first steps?" Kane's mask of civility began to slip. "I don't have to justify myself to you, you interfering fool. She's my blood, and that's what matters in the eyes of the law." "Blood doesn't make a father," Sarah said firmly. "Love does. Sacrifice does. Being there when you're needed does. You've never been any of those things to Mary." Storm clouds were building overhead and the first drops of rain began to fall. The horses grew restless, sensing the electricity in the air, both from the weather and the human tension. Kane made a subtle gesture, and his hired guns spread out, flanking the ranch defenders. "Enough talk. Boys, take the child." Everything happened at once. Kane's men went for their guns and the quiet morning exploded into violence. James drew and fired in one smooth motion, dropping the closest gunman. Sarah dove for cover as bullets began flying, her only thought to reach Mary. Elena had retreated into the house with the baby, but not before her shotgun boomed, sending one of the attackers tumbling from his saddle. Miguel's rifle cracked repeatedly from the barn, his shots precise and deadly. Through the chaos, Sarah saw Marcus Kane spurring his horse toward the house, a pistol in his hand and murder in his eyes. She knew with crystal clarity that he didn't really want Mary. He wanted revenge against her for rejecting him, and the child was just his weapon. "James," she screamed, but her husband was pinned down behind a water trough, trading shots with two of Kane's gunmen. Sarah ran for the house, her feet slipping in the mud as the rain intensified. She reached the porch just as Kane dismounted, his face twisted with rage and something darker. "Where is she?" he snarled, grabbing Sarah by the arm hard enough to leave bruises. "Where's my daughter?" "She's not your daughter." Sarah fought against his grip. "You gave up any claim to her the day you walked away." Kane backhanded her across the face, sending her sprawling. "You always were too mouthy for your own good. Should have learned your place by now." He kicked open the front door and strode inside. Sarah followed, her head spinning from the blow but determined to protect her child. She could hear Mary crying from the back bedroom, Elena's voice soothing in Spanish. Kane moved through the house like a predator, his gun ready. Come out, wherever you are," he called mockingly. "Uncle Marcus has come to take little Mary home." Sarah grabbed a poker from the fireplace, her hands shaking but her resolve firm. "You'll have to kill me first." "That can be arranged," Kane replied, turning the pistol on her. "In fact, it might be better that way. A tragic accident during the confusion of battle. Poor Sarah caught in the crossfire while resisting lawful authority." The bedroom door creaked open, and Elena emerged with Mary clutched to her chest. "Please," she said quietly, "do not do this. The child, she is innocent." Kane's eyes lit up with triumph. "There's my little girl. Come to Papa, sweetheart." He reached for Mary, and Elena backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The old woman was trapped between Kane and the wall, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. That's when James appeared in the doorway, his clothes torn and bloody, but his gun steady in his hand. "Step away from my family, Kane." Kane whirled, his pistol swinging toward James, but he wasn't fast enough. James's Colt roared and Kane stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. His gun clattered to the floor. "It's over," James said, moving forward cautiously. "Your men are dead or running. The sheriff's taken a bullet to the leg and is in no mood to press this further." Kane laughed bitterly, blood seeping between his fingers. "You think this ends it? I'll be back with more men, better lawyers. I'll destroy everything you care about." "No," Sarah said quietly, stepping forward with the poker still in her hand. "You won't." She looked into the face of the man who had nearly destroyed her life, who had come to steal her daughter and tear apart the family she had found. All the fear and shame he had caused her crystallized into cold fury. "You see, Marcus, you made one crucial mistake. You thought I was still the frightened girl you abandoned 3 years ago. But I'm not her anymore. I'm Sarah Caldwell now, and I protect what's mine." Kane tried to reach for his fallen gun, but James kicked it away. "You're done, Kane. Finished. And if you ever come near my family again, I won't be aiming for your shoulder next time." The sound of approaching horses made them all tense, but these were different riders. Territorial marshals, just as Sheriff Coleman had promised, but arriving to find the situation already resolved. The ranking marshal, a grizzled man named Hutchins, surveyed the scene with experienced eyes. "Looks like we missed the party," he said dryly. "Someone want to explain what happened here?" James holstered his gun. "Self-defense. Kane and his men attacked my ranch trying to kidnap my daughter. We defended ourselves." Marshal Hutchins looked at the wounded Kane, then at the legal papers scattered on the floor. These custody documents, they appear to be in order, but threatening violence to enforce them, that's not how the law works. Kane struggled to his feet, his face pale from blood loss. "They shot me. I was just trying to reclaim my child." "With a gang of hired guns?" Hutchins shook his head. Mr. Kane, you're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. As for the child, he looked at Mary, peaceful now in Elena's arms. The courts will have to sort out the custody question, but it'll be done proper-like, not with bullets. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't over. There would be court hearings, legal battles, and more challenges ahead. But they had survived this crisis together, and she knew they could face whatever came next. As the marshals led Kane away, his parting words were full of venom. "This isn't finished, Sarah. I'll be back, and next time you'll find us ready," James interrupted. "We're not running anymore. This is our home." The rain had stopped, and shafts of sunlight broke through the dissipating clouds. Sarah stood on the porch with her husband and daughter, watching their enemies retreat. Elena appeared beside them, her shotgun finally lowered. "It is done," the old woman said with satisfaction. "The evil, it has been driven away." Sarah looked out over the valley, seeing it with new eyes. The ranch stretched before them, damaged but not broken like all of them. There would be fences to mend, wounds to heal, and trust to rebuild with the surviving townspeople. But they would do it, together as a family. "What happens now?" she asked James. He put his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Now we build the life we want.